Welcome to Queer Conversation with Australian writer and producer Grace Valerie Lynette. My name is Silke Bader. With an interest in stories portraying queer teens coming of age in odd and strange ways, Grace Valerie Lynette is a contemporary writer and honest storyteller with a penchant for using experimental formats to portray heightened emotional worlds. In 2021 and 2022, Grace's debut musical podcast, Twinemies, a lesbian teen rom-com currently being dropped weekly with 3 of its 4 episodes released, it's ranked at number 3 in Apple Podcast Comedy Fiction category, and last week was specially recommended by Apple themselves under their new and noteworthy banner. That's big for an Aussie podcast and even bigger for a queer musical podcast made by Community Radio. Let's have a listen.
Chloe!
Darcy!
Chloe!
Darcy.
Would you please?
Get off the...
Absolutely insane.
Number 1. Although Darcy and Chloe hate each other, the two twins were surprisingly close as children.
I read yesterday that you can't prosecute children for biological warfare. It's unconstitutional.
Number 2. Darcy and Margot are not fond of each other.
Yeah, Four Eyes. Like I'm going to trust your opinion on footy.
You probably haven't even read them.
Why is your go-to move always pinning me?
Number 3. Aiden. He is, against better judgment, deeply in love with Chloe.
Maybe I'm going to get back to the party.
Cool. The two have barely spoken in years. Or so they believe.
But I don't feel like that when I'm with you. I'm medium.
Good old medium you.
For now, I believe it's time to start the story. Twinemies, a queer musical rom-com podcast written by Grace Valerie Lynette, coming soon to the Sin Media Network.
Welcome, Grace.
Thank you for having me.
We just listened to the to the trailer, so we get a feel of what is this about, and it had some amazing reviews on Apple.
Yeah, it's going really well. I'm very excited. So it's a community podcast. It was created with a community radio station called Sin Media, or the Student Youth Network, which they're based in Melbourne. And they run this podcast incubator program each year, funded by the Community Broadcasting Foundation, where they work up young creative talent to produce a podcast. And so my pitch was Twinemies, which is a musical podcast, so it has songs in it, and it's a fully scripted fiction podcast that you listen to, kind of like an audio drama or a play. And it's about these 2 twin sisters who are really competitive, and one of them is gay, she's a lesbian, and she has a gay rom-com arc where she falls in love with her ex-childhood best friend and enemy who's a rugby player, and they're forced to share a dorm. But the story itself is about these 2 twin sisters who have this bet going on where they they've like watched all of these iconic 90s and thousands movies like 10 Things I Hate About You and Clueless, and they take all of those iconic like teenage moments, like having your first kiss or pranking a teacher, and they're trying to see who can do the most of them over the course of their final year of high school. And along the way, all these shenanigans ensue. And as part of that, Chloe, one of the twins, falls in love with a mysterious boy who she can only talk to through the vent in her bedroom. And Darcy falls in love with her enemy ex-childhood best friend, Margot. So it originally started as just a queer rom-com because I really love those movies like 10 Things I Hate About You. And I'd never had them as a child, with a queer arc in them because it just wasn't done in the 90s. And so I really wanted to make like a 2000s version of that, and young adult is like really big right now, so it was perfect timing. But my tutor at university, because I was doing this as my final year university project, had just finished doing her PhD in twins in media and twin relationships, and she saw this arc that I had because it didn't even have Chloe really in it. It was all about Darcy. And she was like, oh, that's so interesting that you made her like a twin and there's a competitive relationship there. What if you made that more of the focus of the story? We kind of spitballed. And it just became this much bigger, exciting project.
I mean, a musical podcast is a little bit unusual. I'm sure it does exist, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I listened to the first 3 episodes the other day. I thought, oh, this is so cool.
I'm so lucky with the talent that we have in Sydney.
Yeah.
But yeah, podcasts are really big right now. And it's also it's really hard to get into because there's just so many out there. But I was kind of lucky because I chose to do a musical podcast that in Australia, we've only done 2 other musical podcasts. So one is Slaughterhouse Road, which was by Jessica Hamilton, and she was actually my mentor in this project, which was so wonderful. So I had her going, oh, this is how you record it, and this is what you do with the songs, and that was just incredible. And the other was an ABC podcast, which is called Crossbred, which was incredible. But because it's quite a niche format, I've been able to get really good listens and people actually excited, whereas if I was releasing something that maybe was a bit more not as niche, it would have a bit more competition. But I think that's kind of why the engagement has been so high with this. We're currently at number 3 on the Australian comedy fiction charts. We've just started charting in New Zealand at number 3 as well, and we've just also gone to the US, so that's really exciting. And as part of this, so Apple does like a banner on their app which is called New and Noteworthy Podcast, and they change it every month. And they specially picked out Twinemies and put it on there because of just how exciting it was as a format to have. So it's been some really big, wonderful moments, and I think part of that is because of the format itself. So Twinemies is kind of a special breed of podcast because normal podcasts, have a topic each week that you talk about or you prepare for. Whereas Twinemies, because it's a musical, it requires so much thought and preparation. And so it's taken about 2 years to record, and we've done it in 3 different states around Australia. And COVID has just also been its own struggle to overcome. But we kind of my background is in film, so it was very much similar to a film process where I wrote the scripts myself, and then I spent all of this time producing, and we casted, and then we did the album. We got a wonderful music producer on board called Jesse Williams, who just brought the whole thing to life. I also work with 2 other composers and lyricists whose names are Ben Holtzwart and Tom Ward, who also just took some of the lyrics I was working with and turned them into these beautiful songs that you hear. And so it's not just me who's working on this. I have this wonderful team who are also dedicated to it, and I owe my absolute thanks to for this project succeeding. Yes, when we cast, and then I think we recorded, it was every weekend for 10 weeks, and it was like 8-hour to 10-hour record days, so it was a bit grueling. And it was like a low budget, next to no budget podcast, which I think is why the success of how it's going is so exciting for Australian community radio, because it means we can make these things at low budgets, but they can still have this international appeal. And we just recorded it in my apartment, with lots of blankets around and pillows to try to help the sound better. We did the album in Jesse's bedroom, which has a whole setup with all these instruments and microphones. So it kind of seems, it's a little bit, I don't know what the word is, but because it's so entry level, it's wonderful the amount of stuff you can actually do in the podcasting space as someone who's coming into this from a younger point of view.
So what do you think the basis of the success, apart from that you think it's unique as being a musical podcast, it hits a core with the young, it really speaks the language. Amazing, because a lot of teenagers would see themselves in there, reflected.
Yeah.
And do you think that is, or what's your opinion on why it has skyrocketed?
I think it's exactly those things you mentioned. Like, the format is definitely a big point, but the fact that this is a queer story told by a majority of our crew are queer as well. And it's focusing on the kind of story that you don't usually see in the media. Like, when I was growing up, all we really saw was the bury your gays trope, gay women and gay men dying on TV screens. Or all the lesbian content that I had to consume was like R-rated and was very obviously made for a male gaze. And so to create something that is owned by a queer community for a queer community really speaks the language, as you said. And I think the other part of it is having the young adult audience. They're so energized and excited about content that just kind of helped push it over the edge. The hope is that with these 4 episodes, I can then go and take this story and turn it into a 10-episode arc on a podcast, and eventually get it onto like a stage show or a TV show, something like that, that has the full-blown, incredible, gay, sappy, queer, cheesy story that it is, and kind of get that proper support and funding behind it to turn it into the production that it should be. So the 4 episodes are just at the moment, hopefully, the little slice to get you interested in it, and then we'll make the bigger production later.
And I can so see that as a play. Is that your aim, or more of a TV show or web series?
I'm open to anything anyone will give me. I've never worked in the theatre space before, but I find it so interesting. And with the success of musicals like Fangirls recently, and there's another one coming out soon called The Deb, which is really exciting. I feel like musicals in Australia are about to be a really big space, and I think we're starting to get international recognition for how incredible our musical theatre writers are in Australia. And so that's kind of, I love the theatre. I'd love to have it there, but I'm not going to say no to anything else.
I find it quite interesting that it's so successful overseas. Right? Did that surprise you?
It did surprise me.
Yeah.
I think because it's been such an Australian creation, and these things happen in waves. So we've seen it go good in Australia. We're at number 3 right now, and then as we're now sitting at number 3, we've just seen New Zealand come up and is now sitting at number 3. And then it was like 3 or 4 days ago that the US started coming up as well. I think it's sitting at 12 right now there. So it's so interesting to see how it travels. And you can see, oh, I go from 2 views in New Zealand to 20 views in New Zealand the next day and it just keeps on increasing. So it's so exciting to just see that people are listening to it, enjoying it, and then recommending it to people and how that grows. So I'm very excited about that.
Absolutely, and so you should be, because it's so tough, the podcast market, as we all know. And are you going in, or are you expecting any awards?
Yeah, I'm hoping so. So we have the Australian Podcast Awards here, which are really big and wonderful. And I was actually a judge for them last year in the fiction category. So I have a bit of insider knowledge, which is exciting. And I'm definitely going to be applying for that this year. So fingers crossed there's something, a nomination in the horizon, but we'll see. The kind of biggest way you can support us right now is by listening. We also have an Instagram account, which is Twinemies_musical. And every single like or comment or follow on that page really does promote us to more people and just helps get the word out. But equally, there'll be awards that come out. There'll be album nominations as well for like AMC APRA, I think. I'm still figuring out all this lingo myself. But all of those you can kind of find out by following the Instagram page, which is our central database of anything Twinemies related.
No, I think it's fantastic that you cover the topic of LGBTQI youth. But a dedicated podcast. This is fantastic. Well done, Grace.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. If you enjoy LGBTQI podcasts, make sure to check out our website, LOTL.com, where you will find a podcast section covering reviews on LGBTQI+ podcasts around the world. My name is Silke Bader, and thank you for your company.